Welcome to Unbiased and on the Fence. I'm going to roll this trailer for you guys real quick. Let me bring our guest in today. Of course, we have Sherry here. Let me unmute. Okay, you guys are already unmuted. Sherry, and we have Jon Sumple, director, one of the directors of the movie Extraordinary.
Producer.
The Seating. Yeah, producer, sorry. Yeah, producer.
Yes.
Welcome, Jon.
Jack Roth couldn't be with us tonight, but we got Jon here, and he knows everything about it. So,
looking forward to it, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Well, one of the things we like to do here is we like to create a safe environment for people to come out with their experiences, all sorts of experiences, from ghost and out of body and abductions, or just really anything, because most of the time you can't share those things with the people in your life. You know, it's just too crazy. You sound crazy, so people don't feel comfortable, especially if they're in a profession where, you know, they put their job at risk, right? So what I think you've done in this with this film is you've sort of created this environment that people can see other people are having these experiences, and they can feel safe to come out and begin to maybe talk about it, or maybe connect with groups that of people that with similar experiences and stuff. So I really appreciate that you're doing that, because we're really trying to do that same thing, because so many people have their stories to tell and they just don't feel like there's anyone to tell it to, you know?
No, I completely agree, and that was one of the reasons why we wound up telling the story that we did, was going through the process of the research and even the, we were doing the live interviews. We discovered the emotional side of this was much more powerful than what we anticipated. And it was very obvious from the interview, during the interview sessions for that when we were recording, that we had to tell that story. We had TV shows and YouTube channels that focus on phenomena, and those are good. Those are very important. There's not a lot of opportunity for people to see the emotional impact that these stories are having on the individuals that have had these experiences. So we wanted people already had the experiences, because if you already believe, then you don't need to ask as many questions. But the people that we wanted to target this to were the people who may not be as aware of the things that possibly are going on.
I think that's a good point. And another thing is, for the people who are experiencers, maybe their family members might benefit from watching the film and see, have a little bit more compassion towards their family members. Because that's sort of one of the things that surprised me in this film, is how much, husbands left their wives, or people just, thought people were too crazy, and they just didn't, they end up leaving them alone, and they don't have anyone. And then not only do they have to deal with the trauma of the actual event, they have to deal with the trauma of how they're treated by others and how they're sort of vilified, if you will.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, too. Think about it from the point of view of, imagine having an experience, whatever that experience is. It doesn't have to be an abduction experience, but whatever the experience is, and when you build up enough courage to share it with somebody, and if the reaction is ridicule, it is devastating. It is a psychological, it's trauma, and to have gone through the event to the point where you work up the courage to share it and then have the rug pulled out from you again is a huge negative impact. And I think that's the message that I would want to convey to anybody who has not had an experience, is that just because you haven't had an experience doesn't mean what these people are sharing with you isn't true. Now, that doesn't mean that every single time somebody shares a UFO abduction story that they've been abducted. We're not saying that either. But there are enough storytelling, corroborative evidence that would lead you to believe that there's something going on, and whatever that is having a huge impact on the people who are going through it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that really come through in this documentary is the raw emotion that people have to face. And you can see, I mean, there's no proof, because there isn't any really definitive proof. I mean, there's marks on people's body and things like that, but people can write that off as, you scratched yourself or anything. If they don't want to believe it, there's no way that they can't sort of write it off in their brain. But with this, when you see the raw emotions coming through as these people are trying to tell their story, you can tell that they experienced something, and it was traumatic for them.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say to people too is that when you it's quick to write off something, or it's quick to judge something. So if you see a 15-second video evidence, or you see a photo, or you hear a podcast, or you see a snippet of somebody telling their story, you don't have the full context of what happened. You're judging based on the information that you're presented with. And even though we have an hour and 44 minutes of conversation and storytelling and corroborative evidence, which I would present as evidence, some people are going to say that, well, that's not enough. But my response to that would be, if you ever have the opportunity to sit down and speak with somebody about their experiences, or ever have an opportunity to go to a conference and just observe what other people are sharing at the conference. If you spend time with individuals who have been through this, and I don't mean 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour, or even an hour. If you spend several hours or a couple of days, if you spent several hours or a couple of days with any of the people that are featured in this film, you would walk away with a different perspective. And again, I'm not saying that what happened to them means that it's, hook, line, and sinker the truth, because we don't know. We don't know because there isn't anything that's tangible. There's no empirical evidence to support it. There's no, spaceship on the White House lawn to indicate that this is all true. But when you have people who are sharing stories all over the world, and they're sharing a lot of sequential events about what's happening to them, and they're having similar experiences when they are going through the abduction process and through the hybridization process. For our next film, which will be out next year. And one of the things when I was talking with him during the interview, he said, I broached the whole idea is that, there are people out there who just are anything until with evidence. And he said, and he got very sad. And he said, hearing that there have been people doing research like I'm doing on Max, and he says the documents corroborate that it should be admissible as evidence. People should start to look at that as something to consider as evidence, because they're sharing the same types of things. And some people would be like, oh, well, that's because social media, and that's because these things are being stated on television. But there are cases in countries where people have no access to television or radio or the internet, and they're having abduction stories where they're sharing similar processes. So that dates back, decades, when people have shared stories that the information wasn't accessible to the people that are having these experiences now in remote corners of the world. So the whole idea of that, the narrative being inadmissible as evidence, is something that people should consider, because the number is not like the tens of thousands. It's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world who've had these experiences.
Well, I just think that it's beautiful that you gave him a voice, but to me, it was like there was it was evidentiary support for me when that one woman who had the roommate had heard something and went to her room at night, and the light was on and she was gone from the room and stuff. You know that because that's like a witness, you know.
Hmm. Well, the bigger part of that story is that, this is a lesbian couple, and the woman who wound up getting pregnant had never slept with a man before. So imagine being in a relationship with somebody and you're telling your partner that you're pregnant, and she will immediately assume that you slept with a man. And she said, I have never slept with a man. So it's one of those stories that we felt compelled to use because of that dynamic, and sends a very clear message. Geraldine Orozco, another woman in the film, mentions that she had become pregnant on more than one occasion when she wasn't sexually active. She said it would be impossible to get pregnant. She said, I know my cycle down to the day. She said, I know, my experience. And she said that the certain times where I became pregnant, she said I was not with a partner. So, those are type of things that, how do you explain those? And one of the first things that we hear all the time from people is, well, did you talk to doctors? Did you have conversations with physicians who could validate, what happened? Well, first of all, most people don't know in that moment what they're going through is related to an abduction experience. So most of the time when those things happen, they happen after the fact, where they come to the realization through a regression or through a triggered memory that something, was happening to them. So in the moment, rarely is there somebody who can say, I'm going to run to the doctor and get checked up to see if I had an abduction experience. So that's one of the things that I think is a challenge for some believers out there, or naysayers out there, is that they don't have that scientific proof. We did attempt to reach out to physicians when we were making the film. We had a couple of leads that we were pursuing, one that was really close, but ultimately they didn't want to put their reputation on the line, and understandably so. That is the thing that we heard over and over again, even when we were screening people for the film, just not willing to put my reputation at stake by sharing my story.
I think it was Melinda Leslie, is that her name, that mentioned she knew a doctor that lost his,
Sure.
he was a pediatrician or something, and lost his license. So yeah, there's real risk that, think of all the college you go through to get,
Sure.
to be a doctor, and then all of a sudden it's just snatched away because you
Yeah.
covered the wrong thing or said the wrong thing.
Well, there is somebody out there. We know that there's somebody out there that's going to be willing to do that and do that type of work, and be willing to talk to people in a non-dismissive way, because there's too many physicians who write it off immediately as something that, well, your body absorbed it, or this is normal. These type of things happen, when our response to that would be based on the numerous conversations that we had with women, is that women know their bodies. They know when something's not normal. They know when something is irregular as far as what they've experienced for their whole lives. To all of a sudden have something that is completely unusual happen, and then to go to a physician and inquire about it and have them be dismissive is insulting. And that was, with a couple of the women that we interviewed, both on the record and off the record, they said that it was frustrating that they were not able to get their doctors to listen to their side of the story, and the confusion that they had, they just kind of pushed it aside, which is unfortunate, because that's a big part of what's going on with the people who are having these experiences, is that no one is willing to listen, and when they do listen, they're rolling their eyes at the same time, when what we really need to do is listen with compassion and embrace the fact that they've been through something traumatic. As Melinda says in the film, is that we have compassion for people who have cancer, lost a loved one, who have lost a child, who are going through a divorce or separation. For those, we might not know what they feel like because we've never been through that ourselves, but we know what to do when someone's feeling that pain. And we need to be able to express that same compassion to people who've gone through an abduction experience that is real to them. And one of the lines in the movie, and is I think an important thing to share, is that unless it's happened to you, it's just a story. And when it does happen to you, all of a sudden your world changes. And that's a big part of the message, is that everybody that we spoke to, they said that there was the pre-event and then there's the post-event, and their lives were very, very different as a result of that occurring in their life.
I'm amazed that a lot of the data shows that most people, even if they end up seeing it as a positive thing in the long run, sort of, it's just so traumatic for them to deal with that at first. And I know you've got a lot of flack from sort of the love light community that it was too negative. And what's your response to people that say that? Just the negative part. Did I cut out for you?
I think that what our initial response to that is to understand the context of the film. So this film may have some negativity in it, and it may look at of a child taken away from you as being a negative,
Right.
And the people who have gone through that experience, that trauma, it is a negative for them. So we need to listen to that side of the story. There are other positive situations. There are plenty of people out there who have had a positive experience, but chances are pretty good it wasn't positive from the get-go. Unless they had an awareness going into their first abduction that they had signed a contract that this is what they were meant to do in this lifetime, then okay, sure. But there are a lot of people out there who are convinced that this is a positive event, that it's going to be an ascension, that it's going to be a raising of the vibration for all of humanity, or at least people who are tuned into it. But there are other paradigms that don't believe that. There are the religious paradigms that believe that this is all about the Bible and
Or fallen
the
angels impregnating
fallen
women.
angels and
Right.
demons, sure, yeah. And then there's also the colonization crowd. You have three completely different crowds: the colonization, which basically is they're taking over; the ascension, which is a positive raising of the vibration; and the religious, which basically says that this is leading to the return of Christ. So all three very, very different paradigms of belief, and all three of the people, or all three of those verticals that have followers, those followers defend that to the nth degree, much in the same way that political divides are defended, as religious divides are defended. This is just another one of those kind of like tent posts for people where they're like, I know what's going to happen because I've seen it. Well, you have three different end games with those three different verticals, and that's really what we're going to be exploring in our next film. Is a big part of the next film is about those three different paradigms of belief. All three believe in abductions for hybridization purposes with hybrid children, but all three have a very different outcome for what happens at the end of the day. So we don't know. I mean, to me, I look at this in the same way that I would say that people who believe in a religion, that it's based on faith because they don't have empirical evidence. They have faith-based evidence, faith-based beliefs. And the same thing can be applied to the UFO experiences, is that people who've been through it will tell you that you can't understand it or you can't relate to it until it's happened to you. I've seen the other side. I've been through the ringer. I've seen things that most people haven't seen before. I've had experiences that most people haven't had before. Not all of them have been positive. So who's to say who's right? Who's to say who's wrong? And to dismiss people who've been through something that we don't understand, that's really what we're trying to accomplish with the film like this, is to get people to just step back for a second and recognize the fact that somebody's been through something that you might not be able to relate to.
Absolutely, and I think that's really, you can feel the emotion in the film. You can feel that people really went through something that was a big deal for them, a game changer, a life changer, and whether it ends up being good or bad in the long run, they still have to go through that. They still need the love
Sure.
and the compassion from their loved ones, because it's a big deal. Even if you're having your baby taken away for a good reason, it's still, you feel that
Right.
that loss.
Yeah, and I'm not a woman, so I can't relate to the raw emotion of having lost a child.
Yeah.
But whether you have had an abduction or not, if you have had a pregnancy terminate early, miscarriage, or you've had to go through an abortion, you know what that emotional feeling is like. So anybody who has experienced the loss of something, a connection, a loss of something that you felt a connection to, it's a powerful emotion. And that's really what we're saying is happening to these people by sharing these stories in this film, is that they've gone through a sense of loss. And anybody who's gone through a sense of loss doesn't need to be ridiculed for what they've experienced. We would never ridicule somebody who's lost a loved one, to a premature death. We wouldn't do it. And I mean, I'm not trying to harp on that But it's a powerful message when you're sitting across the room and interviewing people who are sharing these raw emotions. And I would say that they're brave for doing it because they're putting it on the record for eternity. It is now out there to be consumed by all, and they're putting themselves at risk for ridicule. And that was the biggest challenge that we had in screening people to be in this film, is that we wanted to have people that were fresh faces that hadn't been seen before, so that people could see that it wasn't a story that had been told in the past and there was a book deal or a movie or a lot of exposure on YouTube or in social media. We wanted them to be relatively new stories, so that people could see that this could be my next door neighbor. And the three principal people, April, Geraldine, and Rob, they are people that we all know, whether it's a friend, a family member, a coworker. These are people that you can relate to. And they all come from a point of view is that they're not some backwater person who has some crazy wild story that can't be validated. You have someone like Geraldine who had a 6-figure-a-year job, was engaged to get married, and walked away from both once she knew what was going on with her and realized that she had to do something to help other people. She had been activated to a certain extent based on her experiences through regression therapy. So she gave up her career, she gave up her relationship, and focused her energy on helping other people. That's a pretty profound thing to happen in somebody's life. And to not explore that or want to know a little bit more about that, I think doesn't make sense. You should want to explore anybody who's gone through something like that. It would make sense to ask questions. Well, why would somebody do that? What would compel somebody so much to walk away from a career and walk away from a relationship? That's powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to say that Rob in the film, he seemed, you have the women, you would think the women dealing with loss of a baby would probably be the most emotional, but Rob seemed to be dealing with the most post-traumatic stress syndrome, if you will. I mean, he lost all of this weight. He looked like he was going to have maybe he had a terminal disease or something, right? He got really skinny. He looked like he was ready to die, but then at the end he said he was just miraculously healed somehow. But I don't know that he ever considered that maybe the aliens helped him in that sense.
I think he does. I think he really does feel that that's what happened, because the doctors that he was going to had no understanding of what was wrong with him. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have time to do his whole story, but it all started for him back in 2009. Somebody he was working these conspiracy theories and told him, you need to go and look these up. And he was like, he said it was just strange because, a couple of my friends and I had just been talking about some of these things within the last few days. And to have somebody out of the blue just walk in and hand me this list of like 10 things to go and investigate. And he said within a matter of days, he had his first experience. And it was like all of a sudden, again, that the switch was flipped and he was tuned in. His story of his connections to contact are phenomenal. His is more about they showed up in his backyard and basically asked permission to come into the house, and they wouldn't come into the house until he opened the door. And eventually, I think it was the third night, that he said, "Okay, I'll let you in." And then from that moment on, everything changed for him. And he was taken, and he was shown things. And this is something that a lot of people that we interviewed said, is that they're taken aboard a craft and they're shown things. They see a screen, or they're seeing there's something in front of them, this console in front of them that has, they're being shown the universe. They're being shown things that are going to be happening in the future. And Rob's big thing is he still is overwhelmed by what he has seen, and he cannot relate it to people in a way that it makes sense to them. He said it's frustrating to have this knowledge and not be able to share it in a way where people will listen to you and embrace what you're saying. He said, one, because they can't understand it because they weren't there. That's frustrating. And two, that you can't express it in a way that people can understand. That's frustrating. And then the response that you get when you share it from people is like, are you okay? And he's like, that's frustrating. So you get all of those things working together, and it becomes debilitating, emotionally debilitating, that you're struggling with, how do I integrate what I've learned into my existence every day, when I know, when I've seen things that lead me to believe that, you know, what I'm doing here and what we're all doing here is not a good use of our time when you look at what the end game is. So, you know, we interviewed all of the people that are in the film for several hours, and we're eventually going to be rolling out a Patreon page that will allow us to share all of these stories. As anybody who's ever been involved in the film industry knows, is that it costs money to create these stories, and it's about the cost in pre-production, the cost in production, post-production, and then the distribution and marketing. It's just it's a very expensive endeavor. But we hope that by launching a Patreon account, that we'll be able to do smaller stories and give information on a more frequent basis, rather than, you know, once every year or two putting out a documentary film. If we can ramp up a machine that allows us to distribute content more frequently, we'll be able to tell more stories. And one of the things that we hope to do in the near future is to share a bigger portion of the interviews that we did, some of the raw footage, with all of the people that we interviewed, so anybody who is interested can do a deeper dive on any one of the individuals that we interviewed.
Oh, that'd be really nice. So the next movie you said coming out next year, 2020, is it? That's going to kind of look at maybe the reasoning behind what these programs are all about. That's set for next year. Is it going to have a little bit more Rob's story in it too, or?
No, this film. So this is like, we're looking at this as a loosely based trilogy, and the trilogy really is the journey from seeing a light in the sky to having an experience that's connected to hybridization program to hybrid children. Then the question, and that kind of takes us through the first film, which was the Stan Romanek story. In this film, the first film was about a lot of evidence. Stan had a ton of evidence. The first 25 minutes of that film is all evidence. Then we talk about the emotional impact. We have validation from experts. Obviously, Stan had his issues legally, and some of the things that he did to basically discredit himself and his story for the most part. Timing couldn't have been worse for us, because it all happened right after the film was done and ready to be distributed, when all of this went south for him and for us. But we felt that it was a story worth telling, because it was about what happened between 2000 and 2010. And you know, we spent a lot of time with him, with people who were around him, and they were all convinced that, you know, something was going on here. Even if 25% of his stuff is true, not to say that he hoaxed it, but if some things may have been perpetrated, you know, against him, or he was sucked into something to make him look bad. But even if 25%, even if 10% of what had happened to him was true, is still compelling, because there was so much of it. So, you know, that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure is, like, you see the lights in the sky, you have an abduction experience. The abduction experience leads to children. That's kind of where that film left off. This film picks up with the whole idea of a sexual reproduction for a hybridization program. So this film focuses more on the individuals and the emotional impact and the trauma that you go through as a result of having something like this happen to you. The next film, we're going to try to, you know, present concepts that will help people better understand that it's not cut and dry, that it's very open for debate and discussion and discovery, and a lot more research needs to be done. But the first part, the next film is going to be basically in three parts. First part is historical, and back as far back as time, I was to say things like this have been happening for a long time. We need to be aware of that journey of historical perspective. Then we'll talk about the three paradigms that we talked about, and then the third act of the film will focus on the government involvement. And we've talked to whistleblowers, three in particular that we've interviewed, who all had military backgrounds, who all were doing things related to the UFO phenomena while they were in the military, and two of them in particular, under the order of the military, they were participating in a program connected to UFOs. So those are things that we get to that part of the discussion. There is validation. Why would a career military person share these stories when there's no positive outcome for that? There's no benefit to the individual to doing that. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's all about the books, it's about the movie, they're doing it for money. Anybody who's ever been involved in this genre knows that there's very little money to be made. There are people out there that have more of a rock star mentality, and they're leveraging their ability to tell stories and pulling people in so that there's a heightened awareness. Those people are making money, but the experiencers aren't. They're not the ones that are rolling in it, based on what has happened to them and sharing their stories. So they're not in it for the money. They're in it because they need to make some sense of what's happened to them. Or two, they understand that by sharing their stories, it's going to benefit other people.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. Go ahead, Sherry, because you had some Stan Romanek stuff while we were on that. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to tell the chat room that if they wanted to look into Stan's story, it's really interesting. And like one of my favorite parts was the phone call that he had received. And I'm gonna just say, I think that it's really suspect that right before his story was about to release, all that happened. I really do, but that's just my opinion. But I also think that it would be neat if y'all go into, like, I think there's a lot of this stuff that happens, like, physically and also, like, astrally or etherically. And I think that might be where it ties into, like, Rob's experience, like with the consciousness kind of thing, like an abduction of people's consciousness, because I know for a fact that things like that go on.
Well, here's my take on that, and my personal belief is that, first of all, I should preface and say that I am not a dyed-in-the-wool deep dive researcher, UFO expert. That's not my area of expertise. I'm a storyteller. That's where my expertise lies. And I have chosen to kind of walk wide circles around the outside and looking in, as opposed to being on the inside looking out, because I feel like you have more of an objective view, and you also can look at it in a more inquisitive, curious, filled with wonder kind of perspective, because that's what majority of people are coming from. I don't have an agenda. J3 Films doesn't have an agenda that we want to try to advance. Our primary premise is to ask people one question, and what if this is all true? So present information in a way so that you can ask yourself that question and have these discussions and do more research and find out more. But my personal belief is that I believe we all come from the same space dust. We come from the same source. And if we all come from the same source, we're all connected in some way, shape, or form. So the big question is, what is it that we don't know? And this becomes a metaphysical discussion. This becomes what if we're all connected in some way, shape, or form, and that these beings exist in another plane or another dimension, or we exist in a multiverse? These are huge questions that most people can't even begin to ponder, because we don't think that way. We're a linear driven existence. Humanity is linearly driven. We can only think of time sequences and distance sequences in a linear fashion. We cannot think of things outside of that because we've never really been presented with anything else. But what if we do have the ability to move through space and space and time is not linear? What if we do have the ability to go forward and backwards just by going through the veil? If we had the ability to understand what that meant, we open up a whole new world of existence. Some people are afraid of that. Some people embrace that. And that's where I'm sure you guys have covered this in your shows in the past, that there is a lot of bleeding through with ufology and paranormal experiences. People who've had paranormal experiences have had connections to ufology, and people who've had abduction experiences have high strangeness happening all the time as a result of once they are connected to that realm, all of a sudden the things that their perceptions are increased dramatically. So I'm a believer that what we don't know is we don't know a lot, and what we don't know is of value for us to learn more about, to ask those questions. And that's one of the things that we want to pose in making these films is just getting people outside of their comfort zone and to ask questions that they might not think of on a regular basis, and just to ponder it a little bit in a bigger picture way.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that when these stories come out and the people are so traumatized by it, I think it's dangerous to sort of say this is a positive thing or this is a negative thing. To not be honest with ourselves and say, well, we really don't know what it is. It's better to be, like you're saying, outside the circle, looking in objectively, not really pushing an agenda because, like I said, the research shows that most people do see it as a negative thing at first. So you have to show them the compassion at first until they figure out what it is.
Yeah, and I would say that to some people, if you're listening to this and you are of the belief that it's a positive event, my question to you was based on what? What would be your reason for believing? Because it makes sense? Because it resonates with you? Because you're a positive person and you're looking for positive things? I could say the same thing. I'm a very optimistic person. I want to find the good. I'm looking for those things. But there's also a part of me that says, I keep my foot firmly grounded in reality, but I also let the other one kind of dangle out there in space to say, well, what if? What if it means this? Or what if we go down that road? So, when we talk about these three paradigms, I'm open to hearing those stories told from people who believe them with conviction, because it's going to help me better understand, the possibilities. It's going to pose questions to me that I might not have thought about. And it brings up a story that I tell frequently, that after the Stan Romanek film screened at the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival in 2013, it was in front of a lot of people that we knew. I'd lived in South Florida for many years. I had my two partners, Jack and Jamie, also had connections and family that lived down there. So we had a huge supportive crowd there. I would say 80% of the people that were there because they knew us. 20% of the people were there because they were, huge supporters of the genre and were interested in Stan's story. But after the film was over, the people that were there to support us were blown away because they had never really thought too much about this, or they were just so shocked that they had never seen anything like that before. And I had a friend that came up to me a couple of days after that screening, and she said, I needed to process it for a couple of days before I had a conversation with you. She said, because when I'm sitting there in the theater and I'm watching this and I'm seeing Stan sitting down in the front row watching this film with me, she was like, this is real. He's saying that this happened to him. And she said, I only thought that this happened in sci-fi books and movies. She goes, I never thought that this was real. But I'm sitting here, watching this film where an individual is saying these things happened to me. And then I talked to him afterwards and he's sharing, some more stories with me. And she said, I was blown away. She said, I had no place for it. She said, I just never thought of that it was anything more than storybook stuff. She said, it rocked her. She said that I had to think about things differently. And she goes, I felt like I needed to look at everything that I had been led to believe up until this point. Not to say that she was hook, line, and sinker into it, but she was like, wow, if I've never given this any thought before, what have I missed? And I think that's the big question that we want to pose to people, is to think about this. What if it's true? What if this is a potential reality? And it gives you thought towards the things that you were talking about, Sherry. Is like, what if this is metaphysical? What if this is something that allows us to see and move and experience our existence in a different way? I would see that as a positive. Some people would see it as a negative. Some people are frightened by that. But, if we have the ability to explore that through logical thought and inquisitive questions and conversations with people who can help us open our minds, we all benefit. And that's really, hopefully what, if we can be a small little, push of that pebble down the hill, then and get some momentum rolling and start an avalanche of awareness, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, and it's always good too, because sometimes just something being new to somebody is scary.
Mm-hmm.
And until you are exposed to it more and more, and then you become more familiar with it, and then you can look into it and kind of adjust to the idea. So that's really a good thing that y'all are doing.
Well, one of the things that I would say to that is that since the film came out on September 3rd, we've been promoting it on Facebook and social media, and we've had a lot of engagement on social media. And over the last 3-4 weekends, we've had a trailer that was a little bit, I wouldn't say a trailer, but more of a teaser that targets more of the female audience. The level of engagement has been significant to the point that people are sharing their stories on the Facebook feed and direct messages to us and in emails to us. And their stories are profound. And the fact that these women are willing to say, this happened to me too, and here's my experience on social media, where other people could see it and say, thank you so much for sharing that story, or I want to know more, or that happened to me too. That is something that we think is a very powerful thing when we see community come together, because there's a lot of people out there who don't think they have a place to go, that they don't think that they can talk to somebody. So one of the things that we did it's in the end credits of the film was we dedicated a page on our website, j3films.com/support. And there's a support page there that has resources for anybody that is interested in finding out more about what this is all about. One, and two, finding places where they can go to help them better understand what may be happening to them, whether it's through different pages of additional information, but also through resource pages for regression therapists that are available, to help people.
I do have the J3 Films website link below, but it just takes you to the main page. So I guess you'll have to click on support or something to get to that page.
There should be a support page on there too. The page that I recommend everybody that's interested in finding out more about the film is the film's website page, extraordinarytheseeding.com. That has a list of all the places that you can see the film. It has many reviews from experts in the field who have seen the film and have endorsed the film. It has a list of the different awards that we've won. We've been in accepted into 15 different film festivals, have won 5 Best Picture awards, Best Documentary awards, numerous other nominations and accolades that we're very, very proud of, because this is a subject matter that isn't embraced. And every single one of the festivals that we submitted, save for one, was not within the field. The only one that we submitted that was within the field was to the International UFO Congress Film Festival, and we won both Best Documentary and People's Choice Award there. So it's been embraced. The people who have had experiences are the ones who have been most honored by this film, because they feel that it's done their personal experience justice, and it treats them as a person who deserves respect, to be listened to, and understanding, compassion, and empathy.
Absolutely. One of the things that Rob says at the end of the trailer is, "I'm sorry, folks, but not all ETs are good." So that sort of leads me to wonder if we're looking at several, at least maybe 2 different things, because, we've all heard of MILABs, military abductions, where possibly they're working with negative ETs or alone or whatever, and they've got their own programs going, but then maybe there is some positive programming going by positive ETs. I mean, how do we know unless we're open-minded and objective, and when we look at these things,
Well, and I think you find that everywhere. There's going to be good and bad in every group,
No, I was going to say the exact same thing, is that it doesn't matter where you look. It's a yin yang of the universe. If everything was positive, it wouldn't exist. If everything was negative, it wouldn't exist. We have, the universe is made up of energy, positive energy, negative energy, and neutral energy. And it wouldn't exist if we had all of one. So there is always going to be this kind of need for balance, balance in the force, if you will, in order for the universe to survive. You start talking about different laws of physics. You start talking about string theory. You can go on and on about this from a scientific perspective that takes you down a path of, just because what we understand today from Newtonian and Einstein physics doesn't necessarily mean that's all that there is. There are other physics physics, new physics, so to speak, that's been around for 100 years, that has been exploring a completely different paradigm, that has been looking at the bending of time and space and string theory and things of that nature that most people they don't have a place for it in their mind because it's never been brought to their attention before. But when these things start to become mainstream, all of a sudden things change in the same way that they changed when people believed that the earth was flat, when people believed that the earth was the center of the universe, when people believed that back in the late 1800s, the U.S. Patent Office believed that everything that ever had been needed to be invented was invented and they could shut down. That's ludicrous for us to think that where we are today is the best that it's ever going to be. And I'll echo that because I'm traveling throughout Central and South America for the last year and 14 months. And I've had a chance to go to a lot of different archaeological sites for indigenous cultures that have been around for anywhere from several hundred to several thousand years. And you see this evolution, you see this change, you see this progress that is made, you see technology, for lack of a better word, that existed long before it existed in Europe. For example, some of the pyramids and some of the communities that were built in Mexico, Mesoamerica, and even in the Incan cultures have drainage systems. They had plumbing. They had bathrooms. Toilets didn't come into play in Europe until the 1500s, 1600s, but they existed in medieval or in ancient sites in Mexico at the turn of right around the time of Christ. So that's far advanced culture based on what we know today. Another analogy that I would make too is that if you look, if anybody's ever done any research into the Anasazi Indians in the United States and specifically the Chaco culture, Chaco Canyon out in New Mexico, that existed, I think, from around 700 to 1300 maybe was the kind of time period that they existed, and then they basically vanished. They disappeared. But if you look at the construction of their villages, the construction of their buildings, it's very primitive. But 900 miles away in Mexico, they were building things with precision. They were building things that were far beyond anything that was being built by the Anasazi Indians. How is that possible that cultures had so far advanced compared to other ones? And you start to see all these different things that we still don't understand what these cultures did thousands of years ago. They had something that we might not be aware of. And the big question to ask there is that, was there a connection? Did they have the ability to move back and forth through this metaphysical realm? Big stuff, deep stuff, conversations that can go on for days, months, years, but definitely worth exploring because the possibilities are profound if these things do become our new reality. And to assume that 50 years from now we're still going to be doing things the same way, I think is ludicrous. We're going to know a heck of a lot more 50 years from now than we do today.
How long do you think it is until, it's not such a taboo subject? I mean, where doctors can feel confident coming out and talking about it. Because it seems like we've come a long way, to be honest with you, even in the last 10 years,
Yeah. I mean, you think about it you go back 40 years ago, and you go back even further than that, but when the 40s and 50s were, anytime somebody saw a light in the sky, it was headline news. It was something that was a big deal. And then it kind of waned a little bit throughout the 60s. But ever since that time period, when the abductions started happening, when the Betty and Barney Hill story started percolating, and more of these things started bubbling up to the top, there's been more and more acceptance. So you see a light in the sky now, and people are like, yes, yeah, it's a UFO. No one even blinks an eye now. So we've seen this progression for people. The masses accept the fact that there may be intelligent life out there. They accept the fact that there are lights in the sky. The next logical progression is there intelligent life operating those? And then from there you go, are they interacting with us? And from there you go, are they abducting us? Are they having children with us? So I think that as more and more of these stories get out there, it becomes awareness gets heightened to the point where people are starting to accept the fact that, okay, there's more and more of this, therefore we need to pay attention to this, or there's more and more of this, that you don't bat an eye when you hear something new. But what is changing, though, is when the military starts releasing information and talking about this, is saying that we do know now that these, we can definitively say, just what's come out in the last month, that these were unidentified aerial phenomena. So they're saying that they don't know what they were. That's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's huge, really.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Some people will say that's disclosure. It's happening right now. But the big question is are we going to get disclosure of technology first, so that people are more comfortable with the ideas like, yep, those are craft that we don't know what they are. But to me, the logical question is, well, what's operating those? What's maneuvering these craft in ways that physics can't explain, our modern physics can't explain? Something's doing it. So then that begs the question, is there intelligent life out there operating these things? But if the focus is on the technology, which it seems to have moved to, and we're doing away with UFO and now focusing on UAP, we're changing the conversation from the past to the present and the future with how we're addressing it, which is a good thing. Because everything that's related to UFOs is, for the most part, negative. Most of the stories surrounding UFOs that have been reported on over the last 30, 40 years, 50, 60 years, has been done so with tongue firmly planted in cheek and the roll of the eyes when it's reported on the news. If it's not in the fringe media, if it's in the mass media, it's usually done so in a way that makes light of it, which is unfortunate because that preconditions people to believe that it's not true. So we're hoping that stories like we're doing is moving that conversation out of the shadows into the light, so that more and more people can at least open their eyes to the possibilities that their paradigm may not be the only one that exists.
Absolutely. Now, I got to ask you this. Do you think this is a global phenomenon, or do you think it's concentrated in the Western world, or what has your research told you about that? Have you looked into that?
Yeah, I think it's global. Based on the different people that we've spoken to, and the expert side more than the experiential side, is that it really doesn't matter where you're from. You could be in a rural area, you can be in a high rise in a major city, you can be in a third world country, you can be in a remote area that has no access to modern conveniences. It is happening all over the world. The bigger thing is where is the exposure more or less concentrated? And that's a question we get asked. It's like, why does it always seem that this is happening in the United States? Well, it's not, but there seems to be a hunger for it. There's an appetite for it. There are other areas of the world where people may not be as willing to talk about their stories because it might not be as accepted. So therefore, they don't speak of it as much as they do in other parts of the world. But, there's in the Latin cultures, their Latin communities, very much of an acceptance to it. European countries, definitely much more of an acceptance. And even in Asian countries, much more of an acceptance to this. So there is a global awareness of it. There is a global appetite for it. And I think we're starting to see a global acceptance of the fact that the possibilities do exist that we may have visitors among us.
Do you think these other, less developed countries, third world countries, have experiences and they're sort of maybe looking at it more religiously, like it's angels and demons and things like that? Because I even noticed among Christians, they'll say fallen angels, but even from a Christian worldview, there was only 1/3 that were fallen, so you would think there's 2-to-1 good over bad, but they don't ever look at the fact that there should be twice as many good to bad. They just look at the 1/3 that are fallen and assume that's them, and I've always kind of wondered that. Why would you go all in on the negative instead of sort of balancing it out? But I could see other countries, third world countries, maybe their culture will say, well, that's a demon or some kind of spiritual thing going on,
Well, I look at it, again, I'll go back to my experiences over the last year or so. I've been to Mexico, Ecuador, and Peru, have been to a dozen or so archaeological sites. And each time that we visit, I will talk to the individuals that are the indigenous people that are there, either the tour guides or other people that are connected to the locations that we're at, and ask them one question, is that what is the belief of the elders? What is the oral history of the sky people? Without a doubt, every single one of them has said there is an oral history, there is a belief in the sky people. Now, the big question there is, what are the sky people? Is it gods? Is it aliens? Is it the cosmos-related phenomena? Is it, if you look back, I mean, I don't want to get into a religious discussion, but almost every single religion on the planet came from the stars, came from from earthbound existence. It was seasonal phenomena. I mean, I hate to even bring that up because I know that it triggers a lot of people who believe, and there's nothing wrong with having the belief that you have. But the thing that I would encourage people to do is to put your beliefs aside every now and then. Just to pose a question, is that what if what you've been led to believe or that you firmly believe in may be a part of a bigger whole? Maybe it's not the whole. Maybe it's not the end all be all. Maybe it's just a small portion of it. But, most religions come from a pagan belief system. And that's something that most people who are hardcore believers in a faith have a difficult time understanding, is that, the origin stories for almost every religion existed before that religion started.
It also seems like, most of the spiritual experiences that are biblical, or that even other religions are based on, have to do with altered states of consciousness. The experiences where sometimes the whole religion's based on it. And I also wanted to say that it's probably really important to keep following these people, which plus I want to, send all my love to Rob and Geraldine, all the April, all the people that were in the documentary, and to say that it's really important to follow them, because if you look at just like Travis Walton and his experience and how traumatic it was and everything, and the media coverage that he got and everything was so bad and everything. But if you listen to an interview of him today, he has like an entirely different perspective on it, which is interesting that he kind of, because like I said, it's new, it's shocking, it's scary and everything. And then maybe as time goes by, they can have, it may even take 10 years. I think it's really important to continue, follow up with these people from the documentary.
And I think it's important too, is to understand, I would say, if you're an experiencer and you're struggling with trying to find a place for this for you, find people that you can speak with. Feel free to reach out to me on our Facebook page, which our Facebook page is facebook.com/ex2 seeding. So that's our Facebook page.
That is down below too.
And you can direct message me there, and I'd be more than happy to connect you with some of the people that we've met along our journey that are helping people. Geraldine has a Hybrid Mothers, I think it's hybridmother.com is the page, and she does once or twice a month group meetings online so that people who have had experiences can find community. And I think really what we need to do is find more of that and encourage people who've had experiences to share your experience with other people, because the main thing that you learn is that you're not alone, that people have been through something as weird as you may think it is to you. Someone has been through it as well that has a similar story. But even if they haven't been through what you've been through, they will be there for you. They will support you. They will encourage you to continue to share your story, because only by sharing your story and understanding what's happened to you are you able to get to a point where you find a place of, okay, now it makes sense to me. Like I look at those three people in particular in our film, is, Geraldine went through something pretty profound, and she's now helping other people. It has basically changed her life and tuned her in a way that she never knew her life would lead her to. So her life has changed dramatically based on her experience. Rob is still struggling to try to figure out how can he exist, today, in a world that he doesn't seem to belong to or connected to. And then April still has her sense of kind of wonder and naivete. And even though some of the things that happened to her were really traumatic, she sees the benefit of having her child as a result of what she went through. And to her, it was worth it. Everything that she went through was worth it. So she
she was
still
the
has
one that she was the one that they seemed to help her and her husband have a child where it looks like they looked like they weren't going to be able to, but they helped
Yeah,
them, right?
they had a daughter, and then they wanted to have a couple years later they wanted to have another child, and for about a 2-year period she was trying to get pregnant and had several miscarriages. She was having nightmares during that time, and she was recording some of the things that happened to her, and she even said that I never thought it had anything to do with aliens. She goes, I got to the point where I thought there was spirit may have been involved and that there was something present in the room when I was having these dreams, but then she eventually had a regression and found out that it was experiences that were just opened the floodgates for her. But she said one of her last nightmares that she woke up and recorded was that the baby conceived. And she said that when she went through the regression, at first she had no idea what that meant, but that's what she wrote down. And she woke up with a spot of blood. She said that she remembers there being a spot of blood on her stomach, and then she checked the next morning, there was also blood on the bed. And she said that, through the regressions, what she found out was that she was assisted with a pregnancy, and she was told telepathically that she would be able to keep this one. And she's convinced that it wasn't a matter of, this is not, she says, I'm convinced it's my husband and my child, but I think there was an intervention. They did something, genetically, whatever it might be, they introduced something that would make sure that this child would be born. And I would say that this is a very extraordinary child. And some of the things that he has expressed, and he is going to be 4 years old next month, I think. And he has had, some, I would say, bizarre things happen where he can predict, not necessarily predict, but he'll say something, and minutes later it will happen. He has constantly tried to break out of the house ever since he could walk. And whenever he does break out of the house, he'll go stand out in the yard and he'll stare up at the sky. He's done it at night.
Chills.
He does it at night. They said they have witnessed him in the middle of the night. They have security cameras in the house, and they said that they've seen him go and sit on a chair in the living room table and have a conversation, and there's nobody there. And he's talking to somebody sitting at the table with him. He has one time he got out of the house, and they said, "Well, we're just going to follow him to see where he goes and where he would go if we let him go." And he was probably 3 years old and walked out of the house. And they lived at the time. They lived in an area where their community had a cul-de-sac, and behind the cul-de-sac was the entrance to a park, an open area park. And she said they followed him for 500 yards, and he never once turned around. She said we were about 30 yards behind him. She said he never once turned around to look to see if anybody was, to see if mom and dad were there. He gets to the park, and he stands in the middle of the park and stares up at the sky.
Wow.
So, and is that definitive proof? No, it's not, but it is very unusual for a child to have those experiences. And he's shared some information specifically with me, brought my name into some conversations over the past several months that is mind-boggling. So
and he's only
child,
4, right?
He's not even 4 yet. He's going to be 4. But some of the things that he shared, and his mom has said, April has said a few times, she's like, I don't know where he got these words. We've never spoken these words to him before. So he's he's not monosyllabic like you would have a child that's that age, that, he's like using 4 and 5 syllable words. She's like, I have no idea where he's learning this. We've never spoken of this in the house before. He was predicting some of the earthquake activity that was happening out in California back in June and July. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. So yeah, they might have gave him some kind of DNA upgrade or something, right?
Something, he has said that he's talked with different beings before. He's had conversations with them before. He shares information. It's crazy. It is.
Has
I
any
mean,
of your, I was just going to ask if any of your research has led you to think possibly any of these people that are having these experiences are themselves hybrids, and maybe
oh,
we just don't
absolutely.
know it.
Yeah,
You
I think there is a good chance that there are, based on the people that we've spoken with, that there are people who are hybrids who were born here as hybrids.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are, whether you want to call them indigo children. I think if you go back to some of the experimentation that may have been happening with the government in the 60s and the 70s, if you've ever heard of the story Rachel's Eyes, it's kind of like an early evolution of the hybrid program. And then I won't go into it because it's a long story, but it's a fascinating read. It's a relatively short book that you can get on Amazon. That it basically is someone who was a roommate of a girl in college who was blind, and they kind of paired her up with this woman who was possibly a hybrid. And the blind girl met this girl on a couple occasions and just was like, this is absolutely crazy. But I'm not doing the story justice. I read the book over 10 years ago, but I know if Jack was on the call tonight, he would be going on and on about that, because it's something
Rachel's Eyes, you said?
Rachel's Eyes is a fascinating.
I got all into that for a while. It was probably, I don't know, 2012 or something. And that is a really cool story.
Oh, you read it already?
Is.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
no, and it really what it is, it's kind of like the early stages of some of these programs that may have been happening to see if these beings could potentially live, in Earthbound. Because a lot of people who have had abduction stories that were part of a hybridization program mostly talk about these children being off planet. And, they're abducted another time when they're young, and they're asked to, kind of interact with the child or embrace the child and show affection to the child, because apparently that's not something that they're able to deliver, on their behalf. And there's that bonding thing that they want to have occur. But that's a story that a lot of people tell. So, it's, we made the film, and I still kind of ask myself, say to myself that this seems ridiculous. It seems crazy that this is potentially a reality that we may have to embrace at some point in the near future. But I can't deny that the individuals that we've done these interviews with have had something profound happen to them. There's no doubt in my mind that they have been transformed by the experiences that they've had.
I was really surprised that Geraldine, I realized that I had recognized her from an Alba Weinman video on YouTube. I'm like, oh, that's her, and she's got her own YouTube channel. So some people will actually recognize her from Alba Weinman's or her own YouTube channel in the movie when they see her.
It's an interesting thing with Geraldine, too, because when we first, I think Lori Fenton introduced us to her through one of our producers, Lori Wagner. And when we had our first conversation with her, it was in the late fall. It was like November, December of 2017. And she was just 7-8 months removed from her regressions that led her to transform and change her life. And it was all new to her. And, fast forward, here we are 2 years later, and she, is in a completely different space. She's become very well known within the community because of her support structure that she offers, not necessarily her story, but her support structure and her willingness to help people who've been through this. So her transformation has been only over the last 2 years, and it started with Alba Weinman, and then she had her second regression, and all of this. Her life changed. Her story was the most fascinating to me because of how transformational it was, how it turned her life upside down. And yet she still looked at it as, I've been given a gift. I've been activated. I've been turned on. I've been connected to this ability that I never had before, and I'm going to use it for good. She turned what most people would call a negative situation into something that could be of value and help to people who have gone through something similar.
Yeah, even Rob, who seemed to struggle the most with it emotionally, said he was a better person for it. And I was surprised at that because he's still in the midst of struggling with it, but
Yeah.
he still feels like he's a better person for it.
And I
For
think
having.
when you talk with him about that, it's interesting. You talk to the individuals and you see that range of emotion. You see them laughing, you see them struggling, you see them embracing it, you see them strong, showing strength, and you see those weak moments of I wouldn't say it's necessarily fear, but it's anguish. It's a genuine pain and a struggle with how am I supposed to exist in this world when I've been exposed to things that make me see it in a different light than most people do. But with Rob, I think when he says that he's a better person for it, is that the Rob before everything happened was just kind of like tooling along down this path and never gave a lot of thought to these other possibilities. And now that he's been exposed to those things, it's facilitated a whole different way of thinking, that he looks, explores, investigates things and that he never would have before. So I think from that point of view, he looks at it as like, I'm a better person because I've evolved, for lack of a better word. And it doesn't necessarily mean the evolution's been without pain and struggle, but I think that he would say that he is learning, has learned, continuing to learn, feels comfortable with what has happened with him, but doesn't have all the answers. And I think part of it with him and his story was that he was presented with a path that he could have gone down, but he recognized it as a negative path. And he's like, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to be a part of your plan. I don't want to be a part of facilitating something that could be perceived as a negative. And, again, that will be available in his story. And he did an interview just recently, I think it was with Laurie and Fenton just a week ago, where he talked a little bit more about his story. And we'll be promoting that I haven't put a post up on that yet, but we'll be doing that on our Facebook page this week. But yeah, Rob's story is fascinating. Every one of the people that we spoke with have a very different story. And I think that's the key, is that every individual has a story that's unique to them, but there are some commonalities that are worthy of our consideration and further exploration.
Yeah, you actually brought those out in the film, how it seemed like they would be abducted once, and I don't know if they were taking eggs out and then they would be abducted again and then it would be implanted or whatever, but they were all going through the same sort of schedule where it seemed like, at
Sure.
some point they would take the fetus out when it was really tiny, but they were, in all these stories, they didn't get together and say, hey, this is what we're going to say. I mean, but
No.
yet they're saying the same thing, surrounded by their own personal individual story that goes with it, which is quite unique despite these commonalities.
Yeah, and it really was, the challenge for us was finding people who would be willing to tell their story on camera. We interviewed, screened between 30 and 40 people, spent 3 hours on the phone with each one of them. And the ones that we selected to be in the film were people who had really interesting stories, had the ability to clearly tell their story in a way that would not be confusing. It would be compelling. So that was a big part of it. We didn't want to just parade people, on screen that didn't have a story that was compelling. But a big part of it was getting people who would be willing to tell their story. We had several people who disqualified themselves. They wanted to tell their story, but they just couldn't for fear of retribution from their family or from their that. One woman in particular said, if I were to go public with this, it would destroy my relationship with my family, and I just can't do that. I want to tell my story, I just can't. So that's a struggle too. We were hoping to have more men in the film, but we screened 3 or 4 different men. A couple of them were ready to do it, and at the last minute kind of pulled out. We were fortunate enough that Rob was kind of our go-to person because his story was so compelling, but we wanted to have some other men who have had more of the traditional abduction cases where they had semen extracted so that they were part of this program of fertilization. Rob's story isn't like that. His is more of a, shared consciousness is another form of hybridization. And that was pretty much the story that he conveyed. So that's one of the points that one of the reasons why we put that in there, is that not everything is as conventional as we make it out to be. It doesn't mean that it's just not about egg and sperm. It could be about DNA sampling. It could be about shared consciousness. There's a variety of different ways that these hybridization programs can be happening. Again, I'll emphasize it again. We don't know the answers. We're just proposing ideas based on experiences that people have shared that have been corroborated for, I would say decades by tens of thousands of people.
Well, I do have your Twitter and Facebook below, and I want to encourage people to follow you, because we were talking before we went on the air, because a lot of our people here are big fans of the Mandela effect. And you said you might be doing something on that in the future. So if you're not even interested in this, but you're interested in the Mandela effect, you still want to follow them to see if they do come out with something like that in the future, because I'm interested in seeing what you come up with.
I think everybody in the group will be interested in this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things, we have a couple. So we have the Facebook page for the film. So to the seeding is our Facebook, our J3 film specific. So when our next film, we have a title for it, we'll create a page for that. So whenever we have opportunities to kind of cross promote, we will do that as well. But J3 Films will be kind of like the bread and butter news, and then specific to the films that we're developing, we'll have exclusive pages on Facebook for that particular project. So as those unfold, we'll share those. And hey, I'd love to come and do this again when the next film comes out.
Absolutely. And I want to thank Sherry for getting you in here, because it's been an enlightening conversation. I enjoyed. I'm so glad you sent that. I actually, just so you guys know, I just Googled the film, and it came up on like YouTube and Amazon, and just to click it right there, I think like $3.99 you can rent it and stream it and watch it right away, just putting it into Google. So if you want to save yourself time, I know more than that came up. There was other ones too. So Netflix.
Yeah, but it's not on Netflix yet. It's not on any of the the content platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And the model of, and this, we've learned this through the process of the last the two films that we've worked on, is that Netflix was buying content left and right 3-4 years ago. It was all about independent content. Then they moved to a model where they were Netflix exclusive content, Netflix originals. So they very rarely now purchase licensing agreements for one-off films, one-off projects. They do from time to time. But the chances of this landing on Netflix are probably slim, but the chances of it moving on to a Hulu or a Gaia or not saying exclusively, or even on Amazon Prime for people who are Prime subscribers, that is more likely to happen than it landing on Netflix.
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time. Sorry we missed Jack, but maybe he'll join us.
No, he had a last minute event that he had to go to, that I don't know if it was a matter of him not knowing about it or forgetting about it, but last night he told me he was good to go, and then he sent me a message this afternoon saying that he had an event that he had to go to tonight, and he was to please pass along that he was sorry that he wouldn't be able to attend, but he knows that I can fill the void when he's not around.
And I'm sure we'll catch up with him, because I think that it's going to be fun to follow and see what all kind of things y'all put out. Because
another thing he's got some past experience too in the paranormal realm. He's written a book on ghost soldiers of Gettysburg. He's written a couple books. He wrote also one on I'm forgetting the name of it. Oh gosh, that's awful. But it's a UFO story that happened back in the 60s that was government monitoring of a UFO by both Cuba and the U.S. Government were both monitoring this at the same time, and it's basically documenting that time frame and the experiences that were witnessed by people both in the military and in the local communities. Unknown Down, that's the name of it. Unknown Down.
Yeah, if he's interested, we can come on and discuss.
Trust me, he's interested. He would love to. Yeah, he would love to talk about the books. He would love to talk about his experiences with the paranormal. That's where we all started. We started this back in the mid '90s when we met, and it was he took a trip to the Myrtles plantation
Oh, I live
in
right by there.
St.
Right
Francisville, and
now.
that's what started it all for us. Is he captured two phenomenal photographs there that were we had. The Warrens look at the footage or the two images, and one they were like, well, we see this a lot, this kind of plasma energy, but one of them was a disembodied floating figure, and the response for the Warrens was like, this is a 1 in 5 photo. This is a phenomenal image, and I remember him saying to me, he's like, where did you get this again? And that kind of started for us. We did several investigations there. We put together a pilot for a TV show, or a proof of concept for a pilot for a TV show back in '97. That was basically the blueprint for Most Haunted. And we had detailed it all out. We're pitching it around, and nobody was interested in 1997. We're about 5-6 years ahead of the time of the boom in the paranormal show universe. But that's what started for us, and we just continued to talk about projects that we could do, and eventually landed on one in the UFO world, and that's where we've been for the last 8-9 years or 10 years now.
Wow.
If you like that stuff, you need to look at the SLS monitor. I don't know if you've seen that one, where it like shows the ghost in like a stick figure form. It picks it up. I love that thing. Anyway,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen that before.
I love all that stuff.
Well, Jon Sumple, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on here and talk to us, and we'd love to have you back sometime when you got your next show coming up. Or next
Sounds good.
release.
Let's do it. Let's book it.
All righty.
I know where to find you.
Yeah, you know where to find us now. Well, thank you guys for watching now and watching later. Check out his links down below. Click right through to the website for J3 Films. Of course, the Twitter and the Facebook is down there too. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot. Peace. If you'd like to support the work I do, go to paypal.me/UOTF. Thanks.